He hired her from an app, just a transactional arrangement to keep up appearances at the gala. But when his daughter clung to Zoe like a lifeline, whispering, "Can she stay forever?" David realized this was more than a performance. What started as a business deal was now blurring into something real and terrifying. The tuxedo tie felt too tight around David Carter's neck as he stood before the penthouse mirror. Not because it was improperly knotted, but because every adjustment brought him closer to the moment he'd been avoiding. The annual charity gala wasn't just another obligation in his calendar. It was the first major event he'd attend since Lily. The photo propped against his dresser confirmed why his fingers shook as they attempted a perfect Windsor knot. A silver frame captured her looking over her shoulder mid-laugh, infant Ava bundled against her chest. 2 years had faded the colors, but not the way his breath still caught looking at it. His assistant cleared her throat from the doorway. "The car arrives in 20 minutes, sir." She hesitated before extending her tablet toward him. "I've vetted the candidate per your specifications. Background check, vaccination records, even her ballet company references. Though I still don't understand why you couldn't just..." The unspoken question, why a man worth 9 figures couldn't secure a real date, hung between them. David swiped through Zoe's profile without reading. Headshots showed a woman in her late 20s with a dancer's posture, dark hair swept into an immaculate chignon. Not too dissimilar from Lily's graduation photos. "She's temporary," he said, sharper than intended. A muscle twitched along his jaw as he tapped confirm booking. The transaction complete, his tone softened. "Just someone I hired from an app, for the optics." The lie tasted bitter. Studies on bereavement suggest most widowed parents avoid new relationships for years, not because love becomes impossible, but because moving forward feels like erasure. David knew these statistics intimately. He'd funded the research after Lily's oncologist gently suggested therapy. Instead, he'd sponsored hospital wings and pediatric cancer trials, turning grief into spreadsheets and tax-deductible donations. Control was the illusion that kept him upright most mornings. Down the hall, Ava's nanny struggled to button the 3-year-old into a miniature taffeta dress. "No, Scratchy." Ava's bare feet slapped against hardwood as she darted toward David, colliding with his knees. He lifted her automatically, inhaling the strawberry shampoo Lily had chosen during her 3rd trimester. His thumb brushed the birthmark beneath Ava's left ear, an imperfect crescent identical to her mother's. "Daddy go party?" Ava pressed her palm against his clean-shaven cheek. The question was new. For 2 years, events requiring tuxedos meant Ava waving from the doorway as her nanny distracted her with bedtime stories. Tonight marked the first gala where she'd old enough to register his absence. The first where she might ask questions David wasn't ready to answer. "Yes, baby." He kissed her forehead, ignoring the nanny's surprised glance. Routine dictated he'd already be in the elevator by now. "But just for a little while, and you'll stay up to meet..." His pause lasted a second too long. "To meet my friend." Ava's nose scrunched. "Friend like Julia?" Her favorite stuffed rabbit, missing one threadbare ear. David adjusted his cufflinks, platinums engraved with Lily's initials. "Sort of." The apartment intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice crackled through. "Mr. Carter, your guest has arrived." In the lobby 38 floors below, a woman smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her rented gown. The emerald satin cost more than her last month's earnings from the companion app, but no amount of fabric could disguise how wildly she was improvising. Zoe hadn't anticipated the doorman's recognition. "Weren't you in Swan Lake at Lincoln Center?" Or the way her ankle throbbed at the memory. Upstairs, David set Ava down as the elevator chimed. The nanny reached for the toddler, but Ava clung to his pant leg. "No, Daddy, stay." The doors slid open. Zoe stepped into the foyer with the poise of someone who'd performed under blinding stage lights. Her trained smile faltered only slightly at the sight of the child. No profile had mentioned a daughter. Then her gaze found David, and something stranger happened. Her shoulders relaxed. Ava gasped. Later, David would replay these seconds in slow motion, how Zoe knelt without hesitation, eye level with the wide-eyed toddler, how her hand hovered near Ava's curls, not touching but offering. The practiced script they'd agreed to evaporated when Ava reached for the strand of pearls at Zoe's throat. "Pretty," Ava declared. David's assistant coughed. "We should depart. Traffic on Fifth Avenue." One moment. David couldn't look away from the surreal tableau. A stranger in a designer dress, his daughter's fingers tangled in her necklace, the photograph of Lily glowing on the dresser behind them. The evening stretched ahead like a high-wire act. No safety net. No choreography for what happened when performance edged toward something real. Zoe stood gracefully, extending her hand. "Shall we?" David took it. Her palm was warmer than expected. That night, nothing would go as planned. The emerald gown's boning pressed against Zoe's ribs as the town car turned onto Fifth Avenue. Price tag aside, it wasn't her first rented dress, just the most expensive. She'd worn 6 others this month alone for various app bookings, gallery openings, corporate mixers, even a questionable family reunion where she'd posed as a cousin's fiancé. Each time she followed the same ritual, stepping into character the way she once stepped into point shoes with precision and detachment. Tonight's script was straightforward. 3 hours as David Carter's arm candy at a charity gala. No complications. The car lurched, sending a needle of pain up her right ankle. Zoe flexed it instinctively beneath the satin, tracing the scar tissue through sheer stockings. 5 years since the Paris audition that ended everything. The memory surfaced in flashes. The Roseanne-scented backstage of Oprah Garnier, the way her left foot had landed half an inch too far forward during the Grand Jeté, the sickening crack that drowned out Tchaikovsky's waltz. At 23, she'd been the youngest American ever invited to audition for the Paris Opera Ballet's Corps de Ballet. By 24, she was teaching toddlers pliés at a Brooklyn community center, while her surgeon explained she'd never achieve full extension again. The driver opened her door. Zoe smoothed her expression into the serene half-smile she reserved for events, the one that said, "I belong here," without arrogance. But something tightened in her chest as she approached the museum steps. Tonight's venue was the same neoclassical hall where she'd performed Giselle at 18, back when Lincoln Center's stage lights felt like sunrise after Pittsburgh's rehearsal studios. Now security scanned her name off David's guest list without recognition. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected off marble floors polished to ice-slick perfection. Zoe cataloged the room automatically. Exits, power players, potential threats. A skill honed through dozens of these performances. Spotting David near a Calder Mobile, she noted how his tuxedo fit like it was tailored yesterday, how his cufflinks gleamed under the lights. The practiced confidence in his posture reminded her of principal dancers, all controlled strength masking exhaustion. Until he turned and she saw his eyes. They weren't the bored, calculating gaze she expected from CEOs at these functions. Something raw flickered there when their hands brushed during introductions. Zoe almost missed a step. Clients never made her improvise this early. From his blazer pocket, David produced a glass of champagne she hadn't requested. "I thought..." He stopped, regrouped. "You looked like you could use this." Zoe took it, careful not to let their fingers touch. Carbonation popped against her tongue as she registered the vintage, not the generic brute stations served by catering. Someone had pulled a bottle from the VIP reserve. Across the room, a silver-haired matron whispered behind her clutch. Zoe recognized the look. Women always noticed when escorts drank good champagne. She tilted the glass toward David in a mock toast. "Careful. People will think you like me." Light caught the rim of his glass as he raised it. "What if I do?" The comeback startled her mid-sip. Zoe coughed, droplets dotting her collarbone. David reached into his breast pocket for a handkerchief of all things. But before he could offer it, a small blur crashed into Zoe's legs. The girl couldn't have been older than 3, all russet curls and a teal taffeta dress. She clung to Zoe's skirt with sticky hands, grinning up at her with unabashed fascination. "You sparkly." David froze. "Ava." His voice went taut. "Nanny Deb was supposed to want see the horsies." The child, Ava, jammed. a finger toward the charity's auction display, where carousel horses circled under spotlights. Zoe's ribs tightened. The profile mentioned no children. Never break character, never engage beyond contract terms. She'd broken both rules by kneeling to Ava's level. But years of teaching dance had trained her body to respond to kids before her brain could veto it. "Those are carousel horses," she said, pointing. "See how their legs stretch? Dancers hold poses like that." Ava immediately attempted an arabesque, wobbling sideways into Zoe's arms. The collision jarred old instincts awake. Zoe caught her automatically, adjusting the tiny hips into better alignment. There, strong legs. From the corner of her eye, Zoe saw David's grip whiten around his glass. She braced for the reprimand, the reminder that touching his daughter violated their agreement. Instead, he crouched beside them, close enough that his cologne blended with Ava's bubble bath scent. "You never told me you teach dance." The accusation in his tone surprised her. Zoe straightened Ava's sash. "It wasn't relevant to tonight." Ava tugged Zoe's pearls. "Do again." The spinny. Around them, gala guests began glancing over. Zoe sensed the moment slipping. Too many variables, too many ways this could unravel. She should hand Ava back to her nanny, resume her role as polished accessory, but the girl's hands were already in hers, trusting without question. "Okay, ballerina." Zoe lifted Ava onto her own feet, guiding small sneakers to mimic first position. "Now." She hummed a bar of Sleeping Beauty, turning them in a slow circle. Ava shrieked with delight. The sound hit Zoe like a stage light, bright, clarifying. For 3 years she'd measured life in what she lost. The pirouettes she'd never complete again, the stages she'd never grace. But feeling Ava's laughter vibrate through her palms, Zoe realized something terrifying. She still remembered how to dance. David watched them with an expression Zoe couldn't decipher. When the music changed to something with a waltz rhythm, he surprised them both by offering his hand. Not to Zoe, to Ava. "May I have this dance, mademoiselle?" The child giggled, grabbing one of his fingers and one of Zoe's. "Us together," Zoe's pulse stuttered. This wasn't performative affection for the crowd. David's palm cradled Ava's with a tenderness that made Zoe's throat ache. His wedding band glinted under the lights, still worn after all this time. Then Ava did the impossible. She pressed Zoe's hand against David's, uniting them with 3-year-old audacity. Somewhere beyond the ballroom, a clock struck 10. Zoe should leave. The contract specified 3 hours, and clock watching was second nature to dancers. But when Ava nestled against her hip, murmuring about cake and ponies, Zoe heard herself say, "We can stay for one more song." The lie tasted dangerously like hope. The gala ended past Ava's bedtime, a fact she announced by yawning directly into Zoe's emerald gown. "Time for sleepiest girl," she murmured, pressing her cheek against the sequins like they were a favorite blanket. Zoe instinctively curved her hand around the back of Ava's head, an old ballet class habit from catching drowsy students mid-pirouette. David hovered near the lobby doors, watching this unfamiliar ritual unfold. He'd spent the final hour of the event fielding questions about the striking brunette charming his daughter, instead of making small talk with donors. Every time he tried to extricate them, "We should let Miss Zoe go home, Ava." The child ratcheted her grip tighter on Zoe's hand or skirt or hair. Now, in the penthouse elevator, Ava fought sleep with impressive stubbornness. "Story," she demanded, nestling deeper into Zoe's arms. David cleared his throat. "Nanny Deb has your bedtime book ready." Ava shook her head violently. "Mommy Z story." The elevator shuddered to a stop. David missed the floor button entirely, his finger hovering over the panel. "What did you say?" Zoe's entire body went rigid beneath Ava's weight. The child felt it, squinting up through half-lidded eyes. "Mommy Z," she repeated, patting Zoe's collarbone like she was naming a favorite doll. Fuzzy name. Then, as if the moment held no significance whatsoever, she tucked her thumb into her mouth and sighed. David's wedding band clicked against the elevator handrail. Studies on attachment in bereaved children describe this phenomenon, the immediate assigning of familial roles to new caregivers, the psyche's desperate attempt to fill absence with whatever shape fits closest. He knew this, had funded research on it. Yet hearing the syllables, mommy, attached to anyone but Lily made his vision tunnel black at the edges. Zoe's arms adjusted around Ava, though her grip turned careful, as if the child might shatter or attack. The tiny sneakers dangling near her hip had left smudges on the couture gown hours ago. Zoe hadn't flinched then. She did now. Ava, sweetheart, I'm just Zoe, remember? Like at the party? The toddler responded by sinking her fingers into Zoe's collar, mussing the careful chignon. David watched one strand tumble free, dark brown without the golden highlights Lily had always worn. Another difference he catalogued against his will. They reached the penthouse doors. Nanny Deb materialized, reaching for Ava with practiced efficiency. Come along, darling. Bath time. Ava kicked weakly but didn't fight the transfer. As the nanny carried her down the hall, the child peered over the woman's shoulder and blew Zoe a kiss, a habit she'd copied from some cartoon. Alone in the foyer, the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. David methodically loosened his tie. That's new. His voice came out measured, absent of the storm behind his ribs. Zoe had begun unclipping, her earrings, a nervous habit from years of quick backstage changes. The jewelry trembled between her fingers. Kids attach quickly. I see it all the time teaching dance. She dropped the earrings into her palm. She'll forget by morning. David noted she didn't apologize. No awkward, kids say the darndest things. Deflection. She simply stood there, one strap of her ruined dress slipping, hair coming undone, looking more real than anyone had in this apartment for years. Lily used to come home from events like this, feet bare, makeup smudged from laughing, and declare formal wear a crime against humanity. The memory hit David like a rogue wave. He turned abruptly toward the hallway. Come with me. He led Zoe past the kitchen where Lily had burned every attempted meal, past the living room where Ava took her first steps clutching the coffee table. The house held its breath around them. At the end of the hall, David stopped before a framed photograph he'd hung precisely at Lily's eye level. Still did. Lily beamed from the frame, her hospital gown sliding off one shoulder as she cradled newborn Ava against her chest. Even exhausted from 18 hours of labor, she'd demanded someone fetch her favorite lipstick before this picture. For posterity, she'd joked, though the nurse's eyes had been too pitying. Leukemia, David said. He rarely spoke the word aloud, preferred clinical terms that blunted the edges. Diagnosed during her second trimester, they delayed chemo until Ava could be delivered early. A muscle in his cheek jumped. She lasted 3 months after that. Zoe didn't gasp or offer platitudes. She studied the photo with the same intensity she'd given Ava's wobbly pirouette attempts earlier. Then, surprising them both, she touched the frame's edge. Not the glass, but the worn silver where David's fingers rested every morning. She's beautiful, she murmured. Not was. Not yet. David realized then what unsettled him most. Zoe looked at Lily the way she'd looked at Ava, not seeing a ghost or an obstacle, but a person who mattered. Not once had her eyes darted to him, for reassurance or discomfort. Something unclenched in his chest. Ava has her laugh, he heard himself say. The actual sound. It came out of nowhere last month. Zoe's reflection nodded in the glass covering Lily's image. I heard it when we danced. A beat. She called me Mom because of the heels. David turned. What? In the hallway's low light, Zoe looked younger than her 28 years. Before the gala? Ava asked why I wear clicky shoes. I told her ballet dancers train in heels. She shrugged. I forgot the word mommy is sometimes a toddler's shorthand for women in dress shoes. The revelation should have eased the tension. Instead, David felt oddly cheated, as if he'd braced for impact only to step onto steady ground. His cufflink snagged on a loose thread as he ran a hand through his hair. Christ. I thought, Mr. Carter. Zoe's voice was softer now. I'd never presumed to. A crash echoed from the nursery. They both startled. The sound was followed by Nanny Deb's exasperated sigh and Ava's delighted giggle, signs of a successfully avoided bath. David exhaled. I should. Zoe was already stepping back. Of course, it's late. She glanced down at her creased gown. I'll return this tomorrow. David wanted to say something about the way Ava had clung to her, about the photograph, about how Lily would have liked her bluntness. Instead, he walked Zoe to the door like any other client. The driver will take you home. Only when the elevator doors closed did David notice Zoe had left her earrings on the hallway table. Delicate pearls, still warm from her skin. He pocketed them before heading toward the nursery sounds, rubbing his thumb along Lily's wedding band like a talisman. That night, for the first time in years, he dreamed not of hospitals or funerals, but of laughter, Ava's and another woman's twining together like the strands of a slowly braiding rope. The hallway smelled like lavender and lemon wood polish, Lily's favorite cleaning blend. David paused before the photograph as he always did, his fingers finding the slight warp in the frame's edge where Ava had thrown a toy truck 2 birthdays ago. The glass needed dusting. He'd been meaning to hire someone. Lily smiled from the portrait, her hospital gown slipping off one shoulder as she cradled newborn Ava against her bare chest. Someone had dabbed foundation over the dark circles under her eyes before taking this shot. Standard protocol for maternity ward photos, but nothing could disguise the way her collarbones protruded. The cancer had been chewing through her for months by then. Zoe stopped half a step behind him, her rented heels sinking into the plush runner. She didn't gasp or look away. Just studied the photo with the same focus she'd given Ava's dance steps earlier. Acute myeloid leukemia. David heard himself say it like he was reading a stock report. Diagnosed during her 2nd trimester, they waited until 28 weeks to induce so Ava would have a fighting chance. His thumb rubbed the wedding band he still wore. Lily made it 3 months after. The numbers came easily. He'd recited them to countless therapists and grief support groups. 73 days from diagnosis to delivery, 11 weeks of monitored remission, 22 days of agony at the end where even morphine couldn't blunt the pain. The statistics never included how Lily had whispered Ava's name until her vocal cords gave out, or how David still woke some nights certain he smelled her coconut shampoo. Zoe didn't offer the usual platitudes. No, she's in a better place, or at least you had those months. Instead, she leaned closer, her reflection overlapping Lily's in the glass. She's beautiful, she murmured. Present tense. David stared at her. The last woman he'd dated, an unfortunate setup by his COO, had glanced at this same photo and immediately started crying. Zoe simply stood there, her dark hair unraveling from its updo near the same spot where Lily used to lean her head against this wall during contractions. The study on widowed parents that David funded last year found 92% of bereaved spouses preserved their partner's belongings exactly as they were left. Toothbrushes in holders, perfumes on vanities. He'd turned Lily's walk-in closet into a shrine, down to the dry cleaning tags still dangling from unworn blouses. This was Ava's nursery. He touched the doorframe to their right where pencil marks charted Ava's height growth in Lily's looping script. The line stopped abruptly at 2 feet 3 inches. The month Lily stopped being able to stand unassisted. Zoe's gaze followed the marks upward. You kept it. Not intentionally. The lie tasted bitter. Everything in this hallway was curated. Preservation, from the lavender sachets in every drawer to the untouched bottle of Lily's favorite nail polish on the bathroom sink. Habit, I guess. From down the hall came Ava's shriek of laughter, followed by Nanny Deb's exasperated sigh. Zoe smiled faintly at the sound but didn't move toward it. David realized with a start that she was waiting, for permission or dismissal. He wasn't sure. The quiet between them grew heavy. Zoe reached up as if to tuck away a stray hair, her fingers brushing the scar along her ankle, the one David had noticed during the gala when her hemline shifted. a dancer's wound. He wondered suddenly what stories her body carried. Mommy Z. Ava's voice preceded her like always. She skidded around the corner in footed pajamas, her damp curls bouncing. Nanny Deb trailed behind with a towel. She got away from me during lotion. David tensed as Ava launched herself at Zoe's legs. The child smelled like lavender soap. Lily's recipe, still mixed by the same Upper East Side apothecary. Look. Ava brandished a plastic pony, its mane chewed from teething. Horsey bath. Zoe crouched without hesitation, her gown pooling on the hardwood. Very clean, horsey, she agreed solemnly. David watched her tuck the stray curl behind Ava's ear with fingers that didn't tremble. This was the moment he usually intervened when playdates got too familiar or preschool teachers asked about mommy. Instead, he found himself studying Zoe's face for any flicker of discomfort. There was none. Just quiet attention as Ava explained the pony's fictional bath routine with 3-year-old gravity. This yours? Zoe plucked something from Ava's collar, one of Lily's tiny pearl earrings, the pair she'd worn every day. David hadn't seen them since the funeral home. Ava nodded proudly. From Mama Box. Nanny Deb made a strangled noise. Ava rose. You know better than to... The keepsake chest. David's voice sounded strange to his own ears. He kept the cherrywood box on his dresser, locked after Ava started crawling. How did you... Magic! Ava spread her arms wide, sending the earring flying. It landed near Zoe's knee. Zoe picked it up carefully, turning the pearl between her fingers. Her nail polish was chipped, another detail the gala's emerald gown had hidden. When she offered it back to David, their hands brushed. Her skin was warmer than he expected. Seems like she wants to share, Zoe said softly. David stared at the earring. Lily had worn these the night they met, at some tedious investment gala not unlike tonight's. He'd complimented them thinking it would help his chances. She'd laughed and said they were fakes from a street vendor in Rome. Ava tugged Zoe's hand. Story now? Not tonight, Bug. David scooped her up before she could argue, inhaling the familiar strawberry shampoo scent. Ms. Zoe's going home. Ava's lower lip trembled. But Mommy Z... That's enough. The words came out sharper than intended. Ava went still, her eyes widening. David swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. Deb, would you... Nanny Deb took Ava without a word, carrying her down the hall as the child peered over the woman's shoulder. She didn't cry, just watched Zoe with those two knowing eyes. The silence after their footsteps faded was deafening. Zoe straightened slowly, her dress whispering against the hardwood. I should go. She hasn't done that before. David didn't know why he said it. Called anyone? The M word. Zoe touched her lopsided chignon, her expression unreadable. She probably won't remember tomorrow. A pause. Kids that age live in the present. David glanced at Lily's photo. The way she grinned at the camera like she knew some wonderful secret. He used to tease her about that smile. Now it was preserved behind museum glass, frozen in time while Ava grew around the absence. Zoe retrieved her clutch from the console table. The driver, wait. David didn't recognize his own voice. What you said earlier, about kids living in the present. The elevator dinged faintly from the foyer. Zoe's reflection in the hallway mirror showed the exact moment her professional mask slipped. Just a fraction, just for a second. It's easier for them, she said finally. No past to mourn, no future to fear. Ava's laughter floated from the nursery, bright and unburdened. David realized with a jolt that he'd stopped bracing for these moments, when some random inflection or gesture would sucker punch him with memories of Lily. The pain was still there, just duller. Zoe hesitated near the elevator, her ruined gown and messy hair making her look more real than anything in this carefully preserved apartment. You're doing a good job with her, for what it's worth. David found himself touching Lily's wedding band again, Not the absent-minded rub from earlier, but a deliberate press against the engraving inside. Lily had insisted on that too. Sunlight filtered through the penthouse's terrace doors, casting a dappled rectangle on the hardwood where Ava sat cross-legged in pink overalls. She held up the ballet slippers Zoe had left behind after the gala. Tiny satin things, half the size of real pointe shoes. "Can you teach me how to dance?" Zoe's coffee mug halted halfway to her lips. 3 weeks had passed since the charity event, yet here she was, back in David's kitchen wearing borrowed yoga pants, while Ava poked through her dance bag with toddler persistence. The question shouldn't have surprised her. Kids always asked, this after seeing her posture, the way she pivoted on her arches when standing. Her ankle throbbed at the thought. The scar tissue there had stiffened from years of compensating, first for the torn ligaments from her Paris audition, then for the botched surgery that followed. Rehabilitation specialists would call it somatic memory, the body's way of storing trauma in sinew and bone. Ava crawled into Zoe's lap, the ballet shoes dangling from her sticky fingers. "Please?" From the terrace, David listened as he pretended to read emails. His phone screen had dimmed 5 minutes ago, reflecting the tableau instead. Zoe frozen with her hands suspended above Ava's shoulders, as if touching her might trigger something irreversible. "I don't teach anymore." The lie came automatically. Zoe still demonstrated at the community center, still corrected tiny feet into first position when no one was looking, but offering formal lessons meant acknowledging the terrible truth. She could demonstrate but never perform. Ava, unsatisfied, grabbed Zoe's wrists and planted them on her own tiny hips. "Show like horsies." "Ah." The carousel ponies from the gala. Zoe exhaled through her nose. She could explain the difference between prancing and pliés, but Ava already had her feet planted in a shaky approximation of second position. The child's stubborn focus reminded Zoe of herself at 5, forever begging for just 5 more minutes at the bar, while her mother timed her with a stopwatch. Her palms flattened against Ava's sides, adjusting the angle of tiny knees. "Like this." You say, correction came automatically. Muscle memory bypassed rational thought. Her fingers remembered how to guide a novice's stance even if her mind resisted. Ava rocked sideways. "Spin me." Zoe hesitated. Lifting meant twisting. Twisting meant torque on damaged ligaments. But the child's hands were already clasped around hers, trusting without reservation. She stood slowly, distributing her weight to the stronger left leg. "Okay, ballerina." The words felt like stepping onto a frozen pond, testing each syllable for cracks. One turn. A warm little body pressed against her shins as Ava stood atop Zoe's bare feet. They swayed unsteadily, Ava gripping her thumbs for balance. No music played, yet Zoe's internal metronome clicked on anyway, counting the slow 1-2-3 of an adagio she'd performed 100 times before her fall. Ava squealed when they turned, her curls fanning out. Again! Through the terrace glass, David watched them pivot in fractured sunlight. He'd seen Ava dance with nannies before, clumsy hops while they hummed nursery rhymes. This was different. Zoe moved with deliberate precision, her hands cupping Ava's like she was protecting candle flames. The scar on her ankle whitened when she shifted weight, yet she didn't stop. Pain splintered up Zoe's right leg with each rotation. She gritted, her teeth. Physical therapists called this exposure therapy, reintroducing movement patterns linked to trauma under controlled conditions. The theory suggested it could rewire neural pathways, diluting old agony with new context. Theory didn't account for Ava's breathless laughter against her collarbone. "Higher," Ava demanded. Zoe swallowed hard. Her old choreography flashed behind her eyelids, Parisian stage lights, the sickening twist of her landing. But Ava smelled like apples and sunscreen, her sneakers pressing warm against Zoe's instep. Another rotation wouldn't kill her. Probably. They turned again, slower this time. Zoe focused on the feel of small hands in hers, not the phantom ache in her joints. Somewhere between the 5th and 6th turn, something remarkable happened. She forgot to compensate for the injury. Her weight settled evenly, her torso aligning as it hadn't in years. Ava's giggle crescendoed, pure, unfiltered joy that should have been impossible coming from a child who'd never known her mother. But there it was, bouncing off the penthouse walls. Through the window, David's phone clattered onto the patio table. He'd never heard that particular laugh before, not during birthday parties or aquarium visits or any of the carefully curated experiences designed to compensate for maternal absence. It tore through him like sunlight through stained glass, dazzling and unexpected. Zoe's arms trembled as she lowered Ava onto the couch. Sweat dampened her temple curls. "Enough for today," Ava pouted. "5 more minutes?" Zoe looked down at her. Traitorous ankle. The old dissonance between what her body could once do and what it could manage now should have left her bitter. Yet watching Ava attempt a solo pirouette, arms flailing, pink sneakers squeaking, she felt something dangerously like peace. She sank onto the cushions, massaging the scar. "Let's practice plies first." Ava collapsed dramatically into the movement, knees jutting sideways. Zoe smiled despite herself and reached to correct the form, just as David pushed open the terrace door. He hovered in the threshold, the sunlight behind him casting his face into shadow. Neither spoke. The moment stretched fragile between them until Ava broke it with typical toddler subtlety. She cannonballed into Zoe's lap and announced, "I'm hungry." Zoe smoothed the child's hair, her fingers lingering. David saw the exact second she registered what they'd been doing, there in the way her throat moved when she swallowed, the slight tremble in her hands. Nanny Deb materialized with a peanut butter sandwich, breaking the spell. Ava scampered off, leaving Zoe alone, with her throbbing ankle and David's unasked questions. "I should go," Zoe said, reaching for her sneakers. David stepped forward, hesitated, then pointed to her ankle. "Does it hurt?" She considered lying. Instead, less than it did. That night, Zoe dreamed of Paris for the first time in years. But, instead of the Opera Garnier's imposing facade, she found herself standing in David's sunlit kitchen, holding Ava's hands while they turned endlessly to music only the three of them could hear. She woke with her joints aching and her phone buzzing, with a new message from the companion app, another booking request. Zoe deleted it without opening the details. Some performances, it seemed, couldn't be measured in hourly rates. Weeks later, when the text that shattered everything appeared on David's phone, neither of them would realize it had started here, with a trembling arabesque and a child's laughter spinning sunlight into gold. The vibration startled David awake at 2:37 a.m. His phone screen illuminated the bedside table where Lily's reading lamp still sat untouched. The text preview showed a message from his assistant, normally a fireable offense at this hour, but the first few visible words froze his fingers mid-reach. "Background intel you need to see." He thumbed the notification open. The attached screenshot showed a profile from Companion 4U, a dating-for-hire site David only vaguely recognized. The usernames Ballerina23 stood out first, then the face. Zoe's face, unmistakable even with darker hair and fuller cheeks, grinned from a thumbnail photo dated 18 months prior. The accompanying text read, "Professional companion with elite social training, available for weddings, galas, family functions, experienced with high-profile clients seeking discretion." Another screenshot followed. A review section. Stars glowed beside testimonials praising Zoe's ability to blend seamlessly and handle delicate situations. One comment from a corporate finance director stood out. "She convinced my conservative parents we'd been dating for months, worth every penny." Then the last text from his assistant. "She's done this before. A lot." The blue light turned David's wedding band gray. He sat, very still, letting the implications sink in. Studies on cognitive dissonance show the brain processes betrayal like physical trauma, amygdala hijacking logic with survival mode alerts. His throat tightened as he scrolled through more screenshots. Zoe at charity auctions, Zoe in Hamptons, yacht photos. Zoe smiling too brightly beside different men in nearly identical tuxedos. He found her in the kitchen at dawn, wrists deep in pancake batter while Ava babbled about dinosaur shapes. The domesticity of it, flour dusting Zoe's borrowed sweater the way she automatically handed David black coffee without asking, made everything worse. "We need to talk," he said. She turned spoon-dripping batter onto linoleum. Whatever she saw in his face made her set the bowl down carefully. "Okay." David didn't sit. He flipped his phone screen toward her, displaying one of the yacht photos. "Explain this." Zoe paled but didn't flinch. She wiped her hands on the apron Lily's mother had given them, another detail suddenly sickening in context. "That was 2 years ago. You've been lying to us." "No." She untied the apron slowly. "I just didn't tell you everything." In the high chair, Ava banged her sippy cup. "Pancakes." Zoe absently passed her a blueberry, the gesture so maternal it made David's stomach twist. He lowered his voice. "Were you ever going to mention this, or was waiting until you had permanent access to my—" "Stop." Zoe's eyes flicked toward Ava. "Not here." The nursery door clicked shut behind them. Zoe went straight to the window, her fingers flexing like she wanted to grip something. "Yes, I used the app for income after my injury. Yes, I've attended events with other clients. No, I didn't tell you because it didn't matter." She turned. "Not after I met Ava." David's pulse roared in his ears. How very convenient. A therapy book Lily had insisted he read after her diagnosis talked about betrayal trauma, how deceit rewires neural pathways originally formed through trust. Right now, every interaction with Zoe looked different under this awful new light. The way she'd known which wine he preferred at the gala, how perfectly she'd fit into Ava's life. Even her comment about despised in-laws, now clearly a tactic from some companion playbook. "You manipulated my daughter." Zoe jerked like he'd slapped her. "That's not— Kids don't just assign maternal roles to strangers," his voice cracked, "unless someone encourages it." The scar on Zoe's ankle peeked above her sock as she stepped back. Of course she'd shown them that, the perfect vulnerable detail to sell authenticity. Everything about her suddenly seemed orchestrated. The calculated moments of holding Ava just because. The lingering proximity to David when she could have easily kept distance. "Ava called you mommy after one evening together." David paced Lily's hand-painted rocking giraffe. "That doesn't happen naturally." Zoe's chin lifted. "It does when the child has no other concept of mothers beyond stories and photographs." The words landed with brutal precision. "I never told her to call me anything. But I also didn't correct her because what kind of person rejects a grieving child's affection?" The nursery smelled faintly of lavender detergent, Lily's recipe. David gripped the changing table. Had Zoe known that detail? Had she researched Lily's preferences before the gala? The walls seemed to pulse with unspoken accusations. "Get out." Zoe didn't move. "David, I need you to leave. Now." Something fractured in her expression, the first genuine reaction he'd witnessed, if it wasn't another calculated performance. She looked at Ava's tiny socks folded on the dresser, the framed ultrasound photo beside them. "You're right to be angry," she said quietly. "But you're wrong about why I stayed." Down the hall, Ava's giggles turned to impatient shouts for pancakes. Zoe hesitated, then reached into her back pocket. She extended a folded paper. Not a contract or invoice like David expected, but a faded printout from a Paris Ballet Academy. The acceptance letter trembled in her hand. "I keep this to remember who I was before the fall." She set it on the dresser. "Before I became someone who gets paid to pretend." David didn't look at it. Zoe touched the doorframe, the same spot where Lily's height markings began. "Tell Ava I had to go to dance class." She was gone by the time the pancakes burned. Nanny Deb found the kitchen empty except for a ruined breakfast and David gripping both sides of the sink as water ran over trembling hands. Neither noticed the small white box left on the counter. After Ava's tantrum subsided into nap time, David finally opened it. Nestled inside, wrapped in tissue thinner than Ava's baby hair, sat a pair of ballet slippers, not Zoe's, but miniature ones in pristine satin, the kind a beginner ballerina might wear for her first recital. A note fluttered out, for when the music comes back. David sat at the island where Zoe had taken her coffee black for weeks, where she'd laughed when Ava smeared jam on her jeans, where she'd sewn a ripped stuffed animal without being asked. The slippers fit perfectly in his palm. That night, long after Ava's bedtime, he stood in the nursery doorway. Moonlight painted stripes across Zoe's abandoned scarf, the one Ava insisted on using as a teddy bear blanket. On the dresser, the Paris letter sat untouched. His thumb hovered over his phone keyboard. 3 words typed and erased, typed and erased. The same 3 words Lily had whispered to him the night before chemo took her hair. Ask her properly. But the street below remained empty. By morning, the only evidence Zoe had ever been there were microscopic: flour under the cabinets, half-used lavender sachets in the linen closet, and a child who kept asking when Mommy Z was coming home. David found the note on the kitchen counter, the paper slightly warped from the heat of the coffee cup she'd left beside it. A single sentence in Zoe's precise handwriting. I spent years pretending to be someone I wasn't. No signature, no explanation, just the lingering scent of her citrus perfume and the sound of rain hitting the windows. The coffee maker gurgled, its cycle completing on empty. Research shows 72% of people who fear abandonment will leave first. Unable to trust good things might stay. Zoe had walked into the downpour wearing only her thin coat, the one David had once wrapped around Ava during a sudden chill at the park. Her footsteps disappeared quickly on the wet pavement, the same path she'd taken weeks ago when she and Ava collected fallen maple leaves for an art project. The absence wasn't just physical. It was in the way Ava's tiny socks no longer littered the floor by the shoe rack where Zoe always reminded her to take them off. David stood motionless near the refrigerator, Ava's graduation photo still held by alphabet magnets. The house didn't creak the way it usually did. Without Zoe's ballet slippers padding down the hall, without the soft taps of her fingers counting rhythms on tabletops, the silence pressed in like a held breath. 1. Behavioral. Study suggests preemptive goodbyes often follow a specific script. The lever practices detachment long before they go. Maybe that's why Zoe had spent yesterday reorganizing Ava's dresser, folding each sweater with military precision. Or why she'd left David's favorite takeout order taped to the fridge, despite never being asked. These weren't just kindnesses, they were exit strategies. The note fluttered when David opened the back door, checking the garden where Zoe sometimes did bar exercises at dawn. Rain dripped from the empty porch swing they'd stained together last month, its fresh varnish now streaked with water. He found Ava's stuffed rabbit abandoned on the seat, the one Zoe had meticulously stitched back together after the dog ripped it. The toy's threadbare ear was slightly damp. Upstairs, Ava's wails cut through the stillness, the sound raw and unfamiliar. David took the steps 2 at a time. His daughter stood in Zoe's bedroom doorway, clutching the satin ballet shoes Zoe had let her borrow for dress-up. The bed was made with hospital corners, the duvet smooth as poured cream. Only the indentation on the pillow suggested anyone had ever slept there. Abandonment triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. Ava's trembling lower lip mirrored the way she'd looked the day Zoe helped her recover a prized marble from a storm drain. That same desperate faith that someone would fix what was lost. When David reached for her, she shook her head and pressed the shoes to her chest, the ribbons trailing down like wilted stems. Zoe's closet held only empty hangers and 3 forgotten bobby pins on the shelf. The space smelled faintly of lavender sachets, the kind Lily used to buy. David's fingers brushed a single gray hair caught in the wood grain of the doorframe, the only proof that the woman who'd cooked pancakes in his kitchen, who'd twirled Ava in the living room until they both collapsed laughing, hadn't been some collective hallucination. Psychologists note that leavers often leave behind symbolic objects, not as messages but because they can't bear to take the memories. On the nightstand sat a paperback novel Zoe had been reading, a receipt from the farmer's market marking her page. David flipped it open to find a Polaroid tucked between chapters. Ava asleep in Zoe's lap after the zoo trip, ice cream smudged on both their shirts. The image was slightly warped, as if handled often. The rain intensified, hammering against the skylight in Zoe's bathroom. Her toothbrush was gone from the cup, but a single eyelash rested on the sink ledge. David stared at his reflection in the mirror they'd both used, the one where Zoe would twist her hair into a bun, while Ava attempted the same with her wild curls. His own face looked strangely blurred, as if seen through the steam of one of Zoe's 2 hot showers. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck noon. Its chime usually cued their Saturday routine. Zoe stretching at the bar David installed in the sunroom, Ava helping by handing her imaginary tissues like a stagehand. Now the metronome-like ticking filled the silence, each second an echo of the last second. The backyard was a watercolor blur beyond the rain-streaked windows. Zoe's footprints had long since dissolved into the grass, but David could still see where she'd knelt to plant tulip bulbs along the fence line, the soil slightly raised in uneven rows. Next spring's flowers would bloom whether she returned or not. A fridge magnet clattered to the floor. Ava had pulled down Zoe's carefully curated grocery list, complete with little drawings of apples and milk cartons so she could help shop. The paper tore along a fold line as David knelt to retrieve it, revealing 2 sentences written on the back in pencil. "I don't know how to do this, but I want to learn." 3 days would pass before David unearthed the number Zoe had left in her emergency contact forms. 3 days of Ava refusing to eat off any plate except the pink one Zoe bought her. 3 nights of David waking at 3 a.m. to check an empty driveway. But on Monday morning, ballet shoes would be delivered in a white, unmarked box. And beneath, the satin lining, a folded note with an address in the 7th arrondissement. The bell jingled when David pushed open the ballet studio door, the sound barely audible over piano scales and children's laughter. He clutched the white box in both hands, the kind meant for jewelry, small enough to fit in a palm but heavy with what it contained. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting a dozen tiny ballerinas in pink tights, and David's own rumpled suit from the overnight flight. At the far bar, Zoe adjusted a 7-year-old's arabesque. Her hair was down, curling slightly at the ends where sweat stuck to her neck. She hadn't seen him yet. David stood very still, letting the moment stretch. The studio smelled of rosin and lemon cleaner, a scent that somehow didn't match the one in his memory, the expensive perfume Zoe wore to galas. This version of her moved differently too. No calculated grace, just practical efficiency as she demonstrated a plie, the scar on her ankle flexing with the motion. One of the children spotted him first. "Miss Zoe, a man's here." She turned, her arms still curved around the girl's posture. Shock flickered across her face, there and gone. That was new too. The old Zoe would have controlled her expression perfectly. The white box suddenly felt flimsy in David's grip. Psychologists call these linking objects, items that connect people across distance or time. He'd carried this one through 3 airports, past security checkpoints where agents eyed it skeptically. Zoe dismissed the class with a clap. The children scampered toward waiting parents, leaving quiet in their wake. Vinyl flooring squeaked under her ballet flats as she approached. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was lower than he remembered. Paris had roughened it, or maybe just exhaustion. David didn't offer excuses about finding her studio online or tracking the shipment confirmation for Ava's emergency contact forms. He simply held out the box. Zoe hesitated before taking it. The lid came off with a soft scrape, revealing not jewelry or legal documents but a pair of miniature ballet shoes. The satin had dulled from months of handling, the ribbons frayed along the edges. Ava's first pair, the ones Zoe had helped tie that very first lesson on the penthouse kitchen tiles. They were under her bed, David said. She wouldn't let the nanny pack them for school. Tears welled in Zoe's eyes but didn't fall. She ran her thumb along the scuff marks on the toe, evidence of all those living room pirouettes. Developmental studies show children invest objects with meaning, long before they grasp abstract concepts like love or loss. Ava outgrew these shoes months ago, yet still whispered to them at night like talismans. "Tell Ava." Zoe stopped, pressing her lips together. The studio lights caught the fine lines around her eyes, new since spring. David reached into his breast pocket. The photograph was creased from travel. Ava grinning in her latest dance recital costume, a purple tutu Zoe would have known instantly was all wrong for her complexion. The kind of detail she always noticed. She asks about you. Not every day. But when it storms. Zoe touched the photo's edge the same way she'd once touched Lily's picture frame. Carefully, like it might dissolve. Silence pooled between them, broken only by the metronome ticking in the corner. Then, small hands pushing the studio door open with a bang. One of Zoe's students had returned for a forgotten water bottle. The girl froze at the sight of them, eyes darting between Zoe's tear-streaked face and the strange man in a wrinkled suit. Zoe swiped at her cheeks hastily. "Homework for Tuesday, Claire." The child grabbed the bottle and fled. David watched Claire's retreating back. He knew that exact moment, being young enough to believe adults had all the answers, yet old enough to spot cracks in the facade. How many of these children came? From homes like Ava's? How many needed what Zoe gave so effortlessly, someone who simply showed up? The white box sat between them on the bar. Zoe traced its edges with dancer's fingers. Long, capable, one nail chipped from teaching. "You kept them," she said finally. David thought of the closet in his penthouse, Lily's clothes still hanging where she left them, the lavender, sachets renewed annually as if time could be paused. How many mornings had he passed that closet before today, never considering there might be another way to honor memory besides perfect preservation? "She still tries the turns you taught her." His throat tightened around the admission. "Even though she falls." Zoe's breath hitched. Research on pedagogical attachment suggests students retain more than just skills from beloved teachers. They internalize mannerisms, emotional rhythms, even phrasing. Ava hadn't just learned steps from Zoe. She'd absorbed her quiet insistence on trying again. Outside, Parisian traffic hummed. The white box gleamed under studio lights, its contents bridging the distance between two people who'd each built fortresses of solitude in different languages. Zoe lifted one shoe from the box, the satin catching the light like water. "Some things are worth falling for," she murmured. David exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Here was the truth no assistant's background check could uncover. The woman who once got paid to pretend had become the most real thing in their lives. Dancers' feet know something scientists only recently documented. That tissue remembers. Muscles retain patterns long after injury, ready to reactivate when conditions allow. The right music, the right partner, the right reason to try again. Zoe cradled Ava's shoes against her chest, her lashes damp. The clock on the studio wall ticked toward the next class. Somewhere in Midtown Manhattan, a little girl would be waking from her nap, unaware that two people separated by an ocean were thinking of her in the same instant. David reached into his pocket again. This time, what he pulled out wasn't a photograph, but a boarding pass, one way, with Ava's name printed neatly beside his own. The studio door burst open again, this time with a gaggle of teens in leg warmers. Zoe wiped her face quickly and squared her shoulders, but not before David saw the exact moment hope flickered back to life behind her eyes. At the bar, the white box sat empty between them, its lid slightly askew. Neither reached to straighten. "Torsendyke and Peter." The ballet studio had never held more than 6 children at a time during Zoe's lessons, but today it overflowed with folding chairs and sunlight. Tiny ballerinas in ivory dresses fidgeted in the front row, their hair pinned with white. Rosebuds. At the center aisle stood Ava, now 5 years old, clutching a basket of petals with both hands. She kept glancing toward the studio door where David adjusted his tie, his shoulders rigid beneath the tailored suit. Zoe entered from the wings instead, wearing a simple silk dress the color of morning fog. There were no cathedral bells or flower arches, just the scuffed bar they'd left against the mirror now twined with ivy. David exhaled when he saw her, a tension leaving his body that had lived there for years. Studies show weddings in meaningful locations strengthen marital satisfaction by 38%. But this wasn't about statistics. It was about the way Zoe paused to run her fingers along the bar's nicks and scratches, each one a memory. When it came, time for vows, David's voice caught. You didn't erase Lily, he said, his palm cradling Ava's head where she leaned against his leg. You made space beside her. The room's collective inhale was audible. Behind them, the mirror reflected 3 figures where there should have been 4, but no one looked away. Blended family research confirms children heal when new partners honor lost parents without replacement, and Ava's small hand gripping Zoe's skirt was proof. Zoe's response was quieter, just 6 words. I'll keep making space for you. She bent to kiss Ava's forehead first, then stood to meet David. Later, guests would say they'd never seen a first kiss last so long without awkwardness, or one where a groom wiped his eyes so openly. The reception consisted of lemon cake and a waltz, Zoe dancing for the first time in years without pain, David's hand steady at the curve of her spine. Ava fell asleep that night in Zoe's old apartment, now officially her second home, still, wearing her flower girl dress. David found Zoe studying the wedding photos on his phone, zooming in on one where Ava's grin showed a missing tooth. She looks like her, he said softly, pointing to Lily's high school portrait on the shelf. Zoe nodded, not with sorrow but recognition, the quiet understanding that love isn't finite, that grief and joy can twine like ivy on a bar. Years later, when journalists would ask how the Carter Ballet House began, David would credit Ava's first wobbly pirouette. But Zoe knew the real origin lay in this moment. A wedding day where no one pretended the past didn't exist. Where a little girl's Mommy Z had become simply Mom. Where 3 broken people chose to mend together, instead of staying shattered apart. The studio's plaque would eventually read, "Every love deserves a second chance." But tonight, it was just a dance floor with crumbs of lemon cake underfoot and a child sleeping in the next room. The bedtime routine became a ritual of careful balance. David reading Ava a story while Zoe braided her hair, the photo of Lily watching from the nightstand. Developmental psychologists note that secure blended families often create new traditions while preserving old ones, and here it manifested in small gestures. David still kissed Lily's photo goodnight, but now Zoe did too. Ava took to leaving. Drawings tucked into the frame, crude crayon portraits of 4 faces instead of 3. When the last guest had gone home and the studio lights dimmed, Zoe stood at the center of the empty floor. She raised her arms slowly, not in performance but in something more vulnerable, a private dance for no audience. David watched from the doorway, recognizing the movement from Lily's old videos, understanding this was both homage and release. Studies on widower remarriage indicate the healthiest unions occur when new partners help integrate, not erase, former love. And in the quiet swivel of Zoe's foot, that integration became tangible. The brass plaque outside the Carter Ballet House caught the morning light. Here, every child can dance, every soul can heal, every love deserves a second chance. 3 sentences that held everything they'd survived. Zoe ran her fingers over the engraved letters as she unlocked the studio doors. This wasn't just a business. It was the place where her fractured past finally made sense. Inside, 12 little girls in leotards stretched at the bar. Zoe adjusted one child's posture, with a touch so light it might have been air. Across the room, Ava pinned up a struggling dancer's hair, her voice patient as she explained the twist of the bun. The girl kept slipping, but Ava didn't hurry her. She'd once been that child, all elbows and uncertainty, desperate for someone to wait while she learned. Research shows trauma survivors who help others heal recover faster themselves. Zoe felt this truth in her bones each afternoon. When a shy newcomer hid behind her mother's skirt, Zoe knelt without speaking, offering just her open palms. The girl placed sticky fingers in hers. That was all the thanks she needed. David watched. From the office doorway, a stack of enrollment forms forgotten in his hands. This was the life he'd almost lost. The sound of small feet shuffling across marley flooring, the scent of rosin powder warming in the sunlight. He'd built skyscrapers that scraped clouds, but none stood as tall to him as this converted warehouse with its scuffed floors and second-hand mirrors. At water break, Zoe pressed a kiss to Ava's forehead without thinking. The gesture startled them both. For 3 years now, she'd woken up in their home, cooked meals at their table, helped with homework. But some moments still carried the quiet shock of belonging. Ava leaned into it, her juice box crinkling between them. Neither mentioned the dampness in her eyes. One mother lingered after pickup. She twisted her car keys, then blurted out what Zoe had heard a dozen times before. "My husband left last year. Lottie won't talk about it, but she cries before ballet." Zoe handed her a tissue with the studio's number printed in gold. "Bring her Saturday mornings too. We have a group." David found Zoe that evening reorganizing the lost and found. He held up a tiny left ballet slipper, its ribbons frayed from anxious chewing. "Think we should frame this?" She laughed, but the sight of it caught in her throat. How many scared children had crossed this threshold, only to leave lighter than they came? Ava burst in with armfuls of fabric samples for the recital costumes. "The littles want blue, but the seniors say teal clashes with their hair." Zoe tugged one end of the measuring tape around her waist as Ava argued the merits of chiffon over tulle. David snapped a photo without them noticing. The ordinary magic of this, a daughter debating fabrics with her mother, a ballet studio thriving, against all odds, still stole his breath sometimes. The next morning, an older woman arrived early. She hesitated at the front desk until Zoe approached. "My granddaughter," she began, then opened her wallet to a faded newspaper clipping. A young ballerina mid-leap. She passed last winter, left behind her daughter. The woman's knuckles whitened around the child's intake form. Zoe didn't offer platitudes. She simply pointed to the studio's motto on the wall and said, "We'll take care of her here." When the first snow fell, David hung fairy lights in the studio windows. Zoe coached the advanced class through their variations while parents sipped cocoa in the lobby. Through the glass, she saw Ava teaching a new student how to tie her shoes. The girl's hands shook, but Ava just covered them with her own and guided the ribbons into bows. A donation box appeared by the front desk, unofficially designated for single mothers who couldn't afford mats or slippers. By December, it overflowed, with gently used items each tagged with the donor's name. Someone had added a note. "This studio saved my daughter, paying it forward." Zoe tucked it into the frame of Lily's photo hanging in the office. At the year-end party, the children surprised Zoe with flowers plucked from the dollar store bouquets meant for them. David manned the punch bowl, watching as his wife, the word, still gave him pause, demonstrated a waltz jump to a giggling circle of 6-year-olds. He'd hired an escort for appearance's sake 3 years ago. Now he woke each morning next to a woman who filled his home with stray ballerinas, mismatched point shoes, and the kind of love that bent without breaking. When the last student left, Zoe collapsed onto the studio floor, her dress pooling around her. Ava flopped down beside her, head resting against Zoe's shoulder. David lowered himself carefully, joints protesting, to complete the triangle. They sat in silence as the setting sun painted the mirrors gold. Somewhere beyond the glass, another family was just beginning to fracture. Another child would soon walk through their doors, one shoe untied, eyes wide with loss. But tonight, this room held only the quiet certainty of 3 people who'd turned borrowed time into a lifetime. The showcase program rustled under Zoe's fingertips as Ava began her solo. Halfway through, the music skipped. The pianist recovered, but Ava's rhythm stuttered. Instead of freezing, the girl grinned straight at Zoe and improvised. Later, critics might call it messy. The parents in attendance would remember it as perfect. When the curtain fell, Ava didn't sprint off stage. She walked, chin high, arms loose, straight into the wings where Zoe and David stood waiting. Their embrace lasted through 3 bows. No one mentioned the tremor in David's hands or the way Zoe's shoulders shook. The applause washed over them, warm as summer rain. Outside, the studio sign glowed under new floodlights. A woman with tired eyes paused beneath it, a child's dance bag slung over her shoulder. She squared her shoulders and pulled open the door. Somewhere inside, a phone buzzed with a text about tomorrow's beginner class. A coffee cup steamed on. The desk half finished. The bar stood empty but ready. Morning would come, and with it another chance. Ava's left foot faltered halfway through the pirouette. The stage lights hit her face just as her balance wobbled. Not the controlled recovery of a seasoned dancer, but the wild arm flapping of a 7-year-old fighting gravity. The audience held its breath. 3 years ago, this misstep would have sent her running off stage in tears. Today, Ava giggled. The sound echoed through Carter Ballet House's makeshift theater, a converted warehouse space with fold-out chairs and a plywood stage David built himself. Zoe's hands clenched in her lap, not from disappointment but fear of calling out. Developmental studies show children with secure attachment recover from mistakes more easily, but this was the first recital where Ava danced alone. No classmates to mimic, no teacher counting aloud from the wings. Just 60 seconds of Tchaikovsky and one very brave little girl. Ava salvaged the turn with an improvised hop, her lavender tutu flaring like startled wings. The audience erupted, not polite applause but genuine cheers. Behind Zoe, a visiting ballet mistress whispered, "She's got her mother's spirit." The woman meant Lily, whose archival performances still played on the studio's lobby screen. David's fingers found Zoe's wrist. His palm was damp. They'd agreed early on. No backstage pep talks, no mouthing instructions from the front row. Ava would rise or fall on her own. The moment felt dangerously similar to Zoe's Paris audition years ago, except this child had something she never did. 2 steady hands, waiting to catch her either way. The music swelled toward finale. Ava's eyes locked onto Zoe as she attempted the last sequence, a series of sautés they'd practiced all winter. The 4th jump went crooked, but Ava compensated by adding an extra twirl, her grin so wide it nearly eclipsed her stage makeup. Back home there were trophies for technical perfection. Here, in this studio built on second chances, creativity mattered more. As the final note trembled in the air, Ava executed an exaggerated curtsy, more Broadway than ballet, and nearly toppled over. The crowd loved it. Standing ovations weren't common at student recitals, but chairs scraped back across the entire room. David shot to his feet first, his proud, "That's my girl," carrying over the din. For 3 beats, Ava stood perfectly still, chest heaving, curls escaping their pins. Then she bolted off stage, not toward the dressing rooms, but straight into the wings where Zoe and David waited. Child psychologists note that public affection-seeking behavior directly correlates with attachment security. Ava demonstrated this theory by crashing into them with enough force to make David stagger, her sweaty face mashed against Zoe's collarbone. Zoe inhaled the familiar sense of hairspray and little girl exertion. "You were amazing," she whispered into Ava's ear, carefully avoiding empty praise about perfection. Ava looked up, her stage makeup smeared at one temple. "I messed up the turn." "So?" David ruffled her damp hair. "You made it yours." The embrace lasted 6 seconds longer than necessary, long enough for Zoe to feel Ava's racing heartbeat through the tulle, long enough for David to press his lips to the crown of Ava's head, something he hadn't done since she was a toddler. Developmental milestones came differently when a child had lost a parent early. Sometimes regressions, sometimes strange leaps forward. Today felt like both. Backstage, younger dancers clustered around Ava, touching her costume with reverent fingers. Zoe watched from the doorway as her daughter, a word that still surprised her sometimes, demonstrated the botched pirouette with exaggerated flair. "Then I went, whoa, and almost ate the floor." The girls shrieked with laughter. Zoe slipped away, to the lobby where a wall-mounted plaque caught the afternoon light. 3 sentences she'd written the night they opened Carter Ballet House. "Here, every child can dance, every soul can heal, every love deserves a second chance." Fingerprints smudged the brass from all the times parents touched it like a talisman, before enrolling their shy, grieving, or broken children. David appeared beside her, 2 plastic cups of punch in hand. "Remember when she called you Mommy Z because of your heels?" The memory should have stung. Instead, Zoe traced the plaque's edge where someone had stuck a gum wrapper under the corner. She didn't know any better. No. David's shoulder bumped. Hers. She knew exactly what she needed. From the dressing rooms, a wave of giggles crested. Ava emerged leading a conga line of tiny ballerinas, her costume half unpinned and one slipper missing. She collapsed onto the lobby sofa between them, instantly commandeering David's punch. Madame Laurent says I can try point shoes next year. She announced this between gulps, red liquid dribbling down her chin. Zoe and David exchanged a glance. The Paris-trained instructor had been dubious, citing Ava's impatience with technique. But watching her now, all Colt limbs and determination, Zoe saw something more important than textbook form. Only if you promise to practice your relevés every night, Zoe said, tapping Ava's nose and leaving a sticky fingerprint. Even when I don't wanna? Especially then. Ava groaned dramatically before scrambling up to hug them again, punch-sticky hands and all. Research suggests adopted children subconsciously mirror their parents' mannerisms after 3 years of cohabitation. Now Zoe saw it, the way Ava tucked her chin just like David when thinking hard, the exact wrist angle Zoe used to demonstrate port de bras. The cleanup crew began folding chairs. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, striping the plaques. Final words. Every love deserves a second chance. Across the room, Ava balanced on one foot trying to remove her remaining ballet slipper. David moved to help, but Zoe caught his sleeve. They watched together as their daughter, neither born to them nor inherited by blood but chosen every single day, tugged off the slipper and twirled it triumphantly overhead. Imperfect. Resilient. Entirely her own. A slow song came on the sound system, something from the older student's contemporary piece. Without prompting, Ava extended her arms toward them, one hand reaching for Zoe, the other for David, and swayed to a rhythm only she could hear. Not a performance for anyone's approval, just a child dancing because she felt safe enough to move. The moment between songs stretched thin and golden. Somewhere beyond these walls, another father was hiring another temporary date. Another ballerina was nursing an injury that might end her career. Second chances don't announce themselves. They slip in quietly through cracks left by grief, disguised as a child's sticky hand or a failed pirouette or 3 simple sentences on a wall. Ava's smile when the next song began said she knew none of this. Only that she was loved. Only that the dance would continue. Zoe took her hand. David took the other. The music swelled around them as the last light caught the plaque, the stage, their tangled together silhouettes against the scuffed studio floor. Proof that family isn't just who you're born to, but who steps into the choreography when the music changes. Families aren't contracts written in blood, but quiet promises whispered in hospital rooms and ballet studios. This story began with a transaction, a hired date, a mannequin smile, but turned real when a little girl clutched a stranger's hand and wouldn't let go. If this story reminded you that love often arrives in disguise, hit like. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe for more tales of ordinary courage, the kind that changes everything. Because right now in some city, someone is scrolling companion apps. Someone is doubting second chances. And just maybe, their Ava is waiting to ask, can she stay forever?